Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, if I was to take you back in time 3 years ago and say to you, trust me, gang, QR codes are going to be huge, I suspect you would laugh and hit the unsubscribe mode. But when the pandemic hit and the need to touch as few things as possible to slow the spread of the virus, it meant that QR codes were everywhere. But while we were afraid of touching anything physically, bad actors have been fooling many into scanning faked QR codes and ended up putting themselves in an even more vulnerable situation. So on my search to find someone to talk to about this, I came across one of the coolest guys I've ever spoken with on this podcast. His name is Len Noe, aka the Biohacker and White Hat Hacker and tech evangelist at CyberArk. Seemed to be the perfect person to speak with, because in a recent report he highlighted 3 ways that any QR code can be spoofed to provide an attack vector. But when we started recording, we started talking about transhumanism, and Len also showed me some of the many microchips he has under his skin, and has to be another topic for another day, but buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Austin, where Len is waiting to share his story and also offer a few warnings about what to look out for when you next scan a QR code. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
My name is Len Noe, pronounced no, opposite of yes. And if you ask my parents, I was named appropriately because I've heard Len, no, pretty much my entire life. I was born and raised on the west side of Detroit. I was a black hat hacker for the better part of my youth and my young adulthood. When I started having grandkids, I decided that it was either grow up or go to jail. And I decided I didn't really like, long state-funded vacations. So I took a look at what I'm actually pretty good at in life, and that's pretty much been breaking into computers and IT work. So I took my skill set and just kind of changed who I'm working for, and it's actually really worked out well for me. I can take my very unique set of skills and I can apply them in such a way that, number one, it helps people. And number two, I don't have to worry about looking over my shoulders anymore. I've been working currently at CyberArk now for almost 9 years. My specialty is focusing on the attacker's mindset and showing real world attacks and how some of the CyberArk products can either play a mitigation strategy or a complete defense against those real world attacks. My current title is I am a technical evangelist, a white hat, and a biohacker.
It's incredibly cool. And before we even started recording today, you were showing me you got some microchips underneath your skin and magnets, etc. So much going on there. And the reason I bring that up as well is I always like to begin the podcast by taking the guest back in time and ask them, can you remember that moment that ignited your passion for technology and put you on the path that you're on today? Or ultimately, what is your origin story? And I think that is even more appropriate with you because you almost have these superhuman abilities. But can you tell me where all this began?
Yeah, actually, I can. I've been doing IT now for almost 30 years. Mm-hmm. So my father was one of those guys that had to have all of the new toys. So I was exposed to computers at a very, very young age. And I'm definitely going to carbon date myself by saying this, but do you remember the old Commodore 64s?
Oh, yes. How could I not? And you know what? I've spoken about 2,000 people on this podcast, and I would say that machine has influenced so many people in tech. It's unbelievable. It was a real magic really moment. Is.
Yeah, well, back in the day, and for the listeners, this was before the internet, even before BBSs. Mm. So you could order a magazine, and it was called Commodore Monthly. Yeah. And they would give you, small snippets of code and programs that you could code yourself because, back then the only thing you knew was load space, quote, asterisk, quote, space, comma, 8, comma, 1. Yeah. Yeah, that's for anybody listening, go Google that. You'll find something funny. But I was coding for the video game Frogger.
Yeah.
And I screwed up in the code and inadvertently created God mode for Frogger. So my frog could get run over, he could jump in the water, the alligators wouldn't. And that was when it really clicked with me that what goes on in the background directly affects what happens in the foreground. So from there, it was just off to the races. I had a 380. Well, I actually had a TRS 80. I had an 8086, a 386, a 486, then a 486 DX2 with that math coprocessor for the floating decimal point. And, I remember, when there was no GUI and it was Windows 3.1.1 for work groups. And, so, I've been around through pretty much the entire computer revolution, which is one of the reasons why I think I'm as good at what I do as I am, not because I'm this genius, but I know where all the skeletons are buried and I know all those commands. And, I didn't even have a mouse when I first started because they didn't really do anything. Yeah. So my origin story is pretty unique in the fact that, I kind of just took the mistake and it just ignited something in my brain. And growing up on the west side of Detroit, which is kind of a rough place to grow up, it was, get into trouble one way or another. I just, rather than going out and getting into fights, I just started beating on computers.
Wow, what an incredibly cool story. You certainly were much better than I was. It seems to take me longer correcting syntax errors than the actual putting the stuff in there, but that's the story of my life. But it was that path, though, that led you to CyberArk, which is a leader in identity security. But can you tell me more about the company and the problems you solve with technology and what makes you different from other companies out there?
Well, for starters, we were the ones that actually created the privileged access management space, over 20 years ago. As far as what problems do we solve as a company, that one to me is I don't think we have enough time in one podcast. Yeah. Essentially, CyberArk we based our entire business model around privilege and identity. Essentially, we'll take over control of all of your privileged accounts, and we can actually give people back accounts and access in a true least privilege fashion. If you listen to Microsoft, least privilege. That's why when I install Microsoft SQL Server, every one of those service accounts has at least an admin or domain admin access. For a company that preaches least practice as, the strategy, they really don't do much to actually live or make that concept easily attainable. So from CyberArk, we basically will take over all of those privilege and give them back in a as needed basis with the ability of doing full DVR style recordings of all of the sessions that are being used, as well as do Windows event correlation. And we're cross-platform. So we work on Windows, we work on Linux, we even have products for Mac. So our entire model is around privilege and securing that privilege and identity. And everything from databases to cloud to containerization, we have something for pretty much every market and every OS. So if you want, we can delve into each individual use case, but like I said, I don't think we have enough time in a single podcast.
We probably don't, but I'll tell you what we do have time to look into, and that is your good self there. We're talking about Commodore 64, so I'll use a slightly old pop culture reference here and say you've got more aliases than Fletch with, you're known as the Biohacker, the White Hat Hacker at CyberArk, and probably a few more as well. Is there a story behind them names? Because I've got a feeling there's got to be, right?
Well, White Hat Hacker is one that kind of got given to me when I decided to, start looking at things and helping people. Biohacker is just one name for me. People like me, like you said earlier, we're known as transhumans, grinders. I even had somebody when I was in Sweden tell me I was a wet work. I'm like, that's a new one, but I'll take it. For those of you that can't see me, because I know this is an audio, I tell people I have one tattoo. It starts at my head and goes all the way to my feet. I do suspensions. I'm into body piercing. So when I found out that you could actually start plugging RFID and NFC chips and credit card chips into your body, it was like, to me, it was just the next natural phase of evolution. I'm actually in the process right now of working with a company here in the United States. They're called dangerousthings.com. They're where I buy all of my implants from. They're actually a commercial grade implant distributor. And there's actually one over there in Europe too. If you guys over there want to check them out, they're called KSEK, KSEK. Yeah. And, but I'm working with him. I'm actually going to be implanting a full Raspberry Pi Zero W in my leg that's running distribution to Cali.
Wow.
So I can do low energy Bluetooth scans and auto pones while we're just standing in a room talking to each other. So
I'm curious, as a security guy, are there any concerns around having these various chips inside of you?
Concerns from, to be honest, that's a very good question. That could be actually split down one of two paths.
Yeah.
I get a lot of people who are like, are there any medical concerns? No, not really. Like I said, I was born on the west side of Detroit. I think I've well more than outlived my initial life expectancy. But, no, I'm all about doing crazy things. And I think that the human body can handle a lot more than, it should. Am I concerned from from other perspectives? Yeah. The big one that I have, my biggest concern about the transhumanism is honestly just the concept of how people want to interpret me.
Yeah.
I've had everything from people asking me, are these the same microchips that I have in my dog and my cat? To, I'll walk into a room and people will shut off their phones, their Bluetooth, their Wi-Fi. And it's like they expect me to turn into some kind of Terminator and, lasers are going to shoot out of my eyes. So it kind of goes both ways. From a health perspective, no, I'm not really all that concerned because, I'd rather live while I'm here and, but from the just interactions with people, yeah, I do have some issues where I've had some interesting situations. People see the microchip in my hand, they run away from me, they're scared. So I've even been told some things by some religious interests, especially when I put the credit card in my hand, so I guess it really depends on how you want to frame that question. But I do think that, people need to realize that there are more people out here like me than people would realize. Dangerous Things, I've gotten to know the guys over there pretty well. And the truth is, I don't know exactly how many implantable microchips have been sold globally, but I know that Dangerous Things has sold over 300,000 units.
Wow.
And that's just one distributor in the US. So the idea that there could be 500,000 to 1 million different individuals out there that have some type of microchip implant or some kind of ability similar as mine is not out of the question. And when people realize that we're no different, I think that'll be a big thing. But one of the things that I've said from the point, even where I debuted the 3 attacks that are initiated from the implants at RSA last year is, how do you stop attacks if you don't know that the attacks are even possible? And to me, opening up that conversation was just what needed to happen. We multi-factor everything in terms of our sensitive data, but we don't do the same things in regards to our physical access locations. A lot of times you'll see just a badge and the door opens. These kinds of things we need to take into consideration because there are people like me. And if I have this ability, I'm showing you what I can do with them. The bad guys are not going to.
Oh, man, absolutely love that. And I often feel like a bit of a heretic when I'm talking about blockchain and crypto. You see that fear and disbelief. So I know a small part of what you must feel when you're talking to people about this stuff. But if we look outside in the world, one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today was your recent report, which I think it revealed 3 different ways that any QR code can actually be spoofed to provide an attack vector. The first warned of, I think it was trusting in forms. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, basically we're seeing, well, let me digress for just a second. Yeah. A quick little just a real high level history on QR codes. QR codes have actually been around for over 20 years, but the truth is they really didn't see a lot of Western adoption until we hit the COVID pandemic. and the push for that contactless type of interactions. And the one thing that had occurred to me is realistically, QR codes are physical forms of spam email, especially when we're looking at anything in regards to like advertisements or, something that you would see on the side of a bus. Case in point, about a month ago, I believe it was in Taiwan, Bangkok. I know it was somewhere over in Asia, but there was a drone swarm that created a giant QR code in the sky. Here in the United States during our Super Bowl last year, that we had a commercial where it was just a bouncing QR code. Nobody knew where it was going. There was nothing else on the screen. And during our Super Bowl, that QR code was scanned over 20 million times in 1 minute.
Wow.
And the truth is, nobody knew where it was going. So we live currently in a zero trust, type of world. This is the buzzword. This is, the industry, what we're pushing towards. Zero trust. And that means what? Trust, but verify. How are we supposed to verify when all I have is a menu for a restaurant or a flyer, to your point of my original example? I know here in the United States, we see a lot of things if you go into like your hardware store or, your local community center where the bulletin board is, and people are looking for jobs. So I actually saw something very similar to the example that was shown in the publication, where it was just a QR code and it said job fair. All I did was I went out to a website template company, downloaded a job fair website, populated it with fake jobs. And if you are the person out there who's looking for a job, all you do is scan this. Oh, it's taking me to something that looks like a real job site. You fill out the application with all of your information and you ship it off. The difference is it's not going to some type of recruiter. All it's doing is acting as a data collector for whoever the bad actor was that set up the website. And if we don't provide the QR code as well as a URL below it so that we can use that as validation that I'm going to the right place, I could take you anywhere.
And I think I also read in the report, it's not just websites either, and you're also able to spoof, I think it was a Google Play Store to ultimately gain access to a user's phone. I mean, can you tell me more about that?
Well, one of the things that we've seen a lot of during the COVID pandemic, and I'm blaming a lot of this on the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because prior to the pandemic, the idea of scanning a QR code for any type of financial transaction or a redirection, unless you were dealing in some type of cryptocurrency, it was unheard of.
Yeah.
It really was. So, the second use case that I explained, I've seen this in Europe, I've seen it here in the US, where you'll have some type of application for a smartphone and it's like, here, scan this QR code to go to our download page on your respective market, whether it's the App Store or the Google Play. What I did was I ripped down the website page from the Android market, made it look exactly the same. And what I did was I used Metasploit to actually inject a Trojan into the APK. So all you have to do is hit the QR code. You show up at what looks like the Google Play market. Everything looks good. You hit the download button. The only difference would be is it would say, are you sure you want to install this? But just like the standard EULAs that we see on pretty much every application out there, who reads that stuff? The answer is people like you and me, because we want to know what they actually want access to. But the average Joe citizen doesn't. They'll just go, I want this. Yes, install it. And the minute that they do, I've got a full reverse persistent TCP shell into that device. And if you're utilizing any type of VPN or any type of secured tunnel application back into your corporate environment, there is the possibility that I can actually take advantage of that and traverse that connection back in. We're seeing more and more loosely connected devices, IoT, as that initial foothold to navigate back into an environment. And people are not doing enough about it. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, and we're seeing this in the wild, is the next generation of spearfishing. We're seeing people actually email targets with a QR code embedded in the email body. Because when you think about it, most of your antiviruses, your EDRs, they don't have ocular character recognition. They're not going to actually disseminate what that QR code is being redirected to. And if you scan that with a mobile device, that is a direct action, and it's going to bypass any type of antivirus on your phone as well. So we're seeing QR codes now used in advanced spearfishing attacks through email just to get that QR code in front of somebody.
It really is. It just gives so much food for thought. And in a very cheesy, tenuous link, I've got to also mention here, because we've mentioned the App Store and sending people to different websites. But I believe you also were able to fool people when they were signing in to order takeout as well. I mean, how did that work?
Oh, that one was actually one of the funnest ones. I mean, I travel quite extensively for CyberArk, and I know everyone out there has seen where you walk into a restaurant, you walk into a bar, I need a menu. Well, we have this sticker on the table here. Scan this sticker to get our menu. I will personally tell you, I will not scan a QR code menu. I just won't do it. I will actually look up the name of the restaurant and go there the long way through DuckDuckGo just to get to the menu. Because the truth is, once again, trust but verify. I have a QR code. How do I know somebody like me didn't print a QR code, put it over the top of their QR code? There are so many tools out there. One of them is called SiteSucker. Another one's called Offline Explorer. We can rip entire websites of other people down locally. And essentially, I picked a restaurant here in the United States. I did a site rip of their website, ripped out all of their domain validation scripts out of the HTML code. And essentially, I put their little menu placard with the QR code in it right next to mine and said, can you tell me which one of these is safe?
Yeah.
And if you go to their menu, you get the nice little Moby version of their takeout menu. If you go to mine, you get the Moby version of their takeout menu. The only difference is I used the beef suite. And yes, it's an oldie but a goodie, but I love beef. The browser extension exploit framework. Essentially, it's a website that is utilizing Java to hook browsers. And the minute a browser opens, I have a connection into that device. It doesn't matter if it's Android, iOS, if it's a tablet, if it's a phone, if it's Windows, if it's Linux. So due to the fact that it's completely Java, the minute that browser comes up, I have access. I can geolocate the device. I can enumerate the LAN that it's connected to. I can pull stats in terms of connection, what types of hardware is in the device. But what gets even scarier is I can actually run on-device spearfishing attacks. So say, for example, they're using LastPass. I can actually prompt an HTML5 floating window that looks like the LastPass login to prompt on their device. But it's actually just a form.
Yeah.
So I can, at that point, all I have to do is initiate that. You put in your details for your LastPass, and now I have the keys to your entire password safe. Wow. And it all happens on the device.
That's just insane. And you said at the very beginning of our interview today that you blame the pandemic, and I completely agree with you, because so many people now just blindly trust any QR code that they see and will follow anything, anywhere, any sticker that they see. And ultimately, your research has revealed how mobile devices can be taken over and used to provide an attack vector into corporate environments to launch those advanced attacks. Like you said, the antivirus software doesn't see what's coming in a lot of those instances. So I'm curious, when you were the bearer of this bad news, what kind of feedback did you get?
Everything from fear and disbelief to just outright anger at me for pointing it out.
Yeah.
but the truth, the one thing that I wanted to say at that point is we as security professionals in general, we have taken so many campaigns about phishing attacks when it comes to email. And the question that I would ask, and just be honest with yourself. If what I'm looking at right now, as I'm walking through the train station or the mall, if what I'm looking at in terms of an advertisement or, some type of, information, if this showed up in my spam inbox, would I click on this? Because essentially that's the same thing we're dealing with. Those QR codes are hyperlinks, and I think what we need to do is just get people to understand these are the same as an email. You're going to get the exact same responses if you click on a link. And we just need to get that link between email and QR in people's minds to realize we're dealing with the same technologies, the same types of processes and methodologies. So it's not that I'm anti-QR, I am anti-unsafe QR. And to that point, I think we also need to start demanding from all these different advertising agencies and everything, if you're going to give us a QR code, you need to provide the link to where you're sending me below it. So that way, if I scan it, and let's say I want to go to, I don't know, this is London. Let's say I want to go to the Harry Potter store. Yeah. And I'm going to scan a QR code. Tell me that I'm going to harrypotter.com/store. So when I scan it and I look at my URL, if it says, shortlink.bit.ly/123A6, wait a minute, there may be a problem here. Right now, advertisers are basically just going off of the fact that everybody has adopted this technology, and due to this pandemic and the force for the contactless adoptions, we've run headlong into this with our heads in the sky, not looking at what we're running at. And there are so many different things to trip over. And we just need to make people aware that they are the same, and the same scrutiny that we give to emails coming into our inbox should be taken against QR codes. I've told people if it's something you're interested in and there's a QR code, if they don't give you a link, Google the product. If you're at a restaurant or someplace and they don't have a paper menu, Google the name of the restaurant and navigate to the menu. Don't put your security, and especially because if we're talking about your personal phones, could go beyond just the ideas of getting back into your corporate network. This could go into compromising your own identity, could potentially lead to identity theft, money theft. This is just a headache that you really don't need, and it's very easy to avoid.
And it's quite amusing, really, because if we go back 3 years ago, QR codes were dead. Nobody would go anywhere near them. But now everyone's blindly going in.
Exactly. I blame the governments for a lot of this. I really, really do. It would be one thing to say, hey, these things are here because we don't want people coming into contact due to the pandemic. That's great. But we should have actually said, just like with an email, apply a little common sense. We had one situation here in Texas where people were using QR codes to actually put fake parking tickets on cars. And it said, if you want to pay now, just scan this QR code and you can pay your ticket online. And they made a ton of money, and even beyond that, there was a very large financial institution in Europe who, through the use of a QR code, you could actually set up a secondary mobile device with access to your bank account. And bad actors were basically using this and Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, in like I want to buy something from you. And they would send them the QR code that said, hey, scan this so I can send you the money. And they were actually setting up access for the guy to gain access to their bank accounts. So we need to just be aware that these things, these funny little boxes, they can do things and they can do bad things. So don't run away from QR codes as if they were, some kind of an instant virus, but apply a little common sense and be aware of your surroundings and look for things. Case in point, we had one situation here in the States where there was it had something to do with like COVID testing. And somebody had actually put a sticker on top of the actual printed banner that actually redirected them to COVID misinformation. If things don't look right, if there's a sticker on top of a sticker, don't do it. Draw a line in the sand. Unless you're doing some type of a crypto transfer, I would never, ever use a QR code for any type of financial transaction. Just look at it from the same point you would look at as an email. And I think we would be in a much better place. And I just wish people would realize that. And I'm hoping through discussions like this, we can start raising the awareness and start forcing advertisers to show a little bit more transparency and give us that source of trust that we can use.
100% with you there. And I suspect we'll have business leaders listening all over the world, probably on the commute to the office, and they're going to go into the office with the light bulb moment going, we need to do something about this. You give some great tips already, but is there anything else businesses could do to better prepare against threats like this and raising awareness? And how are you helping make that process easier at CyberArk too?
Well, first and foremost, MDMs for enterprise, absolutely. Make sure you have some type of a mobile device management system. Identity. Even Microsoft will tell you, everybody says these days, assume breach. And if you follow that mentality, the first thing we have to think is, all right, somebody is already in here. So it's no longer a question of how do I keep the bad guys out, but how do I limit the damage? Definitely some type of multi-factor authentication to access any type of elevated services from your mobile device, single sign-on, some type of MFA. So if somebody like me is able to actually get onto your device, I'm not necessarily going to be able to use all of the accounts and the privilege that those accounts may have on their respective services. Additionally, what I would do is, if you're not using NFC or any of these other types of crazy tools on your phones, shut them off. Shut them off. And what am I doing? I'm getting out here and showing people and having amazing conversations with people such as yourself to let people know they're not safe. And if you don't believe me, go check out these videos. Come sit and listen to one of my talks. Hell, reach out to me. I love having conversations with people. I love being the one to sit there and show them, this is the real world that's out there. And I'm going to show you nicely, but the bad guys, they're just going to take your stuff and run. And it's up to you. Security, I honestly really do believe, is a pay me now or a pay me later game. You can pay me a little bit now and put those preventative measures. You can take the time to invest in a defense in depth strategy and a layered security approach. Or you can wait, and if you get breached, you can pay for digital forensics and incident response. You can pay with your company reputation, and you can pay with the loss of revenue and confidence in your users. But it's pay me now or pay me later, and it always will be.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for sharing so many great insights there. Pure gold. And we did start the podcast talking about your origin story. And as we've come full circle, I'm going to say some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests or listened to this podcast. So with that in mind, is there a person that you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, and why? Because he or she might just see this, and I think it'd be a great idea to send that out into the universe. Who knows what we can manifest together today.
There really is. His name is Josiah Zahner. There's two different forms of biohacking. You have me, like I said, I'm on the grinder or transhuman side, and then you have the genetic side. Josiah Zahner is a scientist, and he owns a company called the Odin, THE-ODIN.com. And this is a do-it-at-home bioengineering, CRISPR kind of thing. He was actually in an amazing documentary that came out on Netflix back in 2019 called The Unnatural Selection. And this guy is, in my opinion, basically the maverick of genetics. He actually has injected himself with CRISPR strings to try and cure gastrointestinal issues. Him and a couple other scientists, when the COVID pandemic kicked off, they did research. They made their own CRISPR COVID vaccines that they used, and they showed an actual increase in the spike protein to prevent COVID-19. They put all of their research out as open source for the community. I think somewhere between the concept of genetic engineering and biohacking and the advancement of technology into the human body, I think somewhere between these two fields is what humanity is going to look like somewhere in the next 20 to 50 years. So the idea of sitting down and just having a theological discussion about the future of humanity with someone on the other side of biohacking, I think that would make for just an amazing conversation.
I think it really would. And if it does happen, you've got to promise me you come back and report on it, because I just know that the two of you would have a complete blast. But before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more about you, your work, check out some of your videos, or equally find out more about CyberArk, what's the best starting point for everything?
Well, for CyberArk, because they are the company that allows me these opportunities, we'll give them top billing.
Yeah.
Go ahead and check out CyberArk.com. I would also very highly recommend the CyberArk Labs GitHub. We release a lot of security tools to the community for free. For me, my hacker name is Hacker213. You can check me out. I've got a YouTube channel, Len Noe on LinkedIn, at Hacker_213 at Twitter. Or just Google Len Noe Biohacker, and I think I got the first 5 pages of Google, so I'm not hard to find.
Oh, I love it. Well, as we said at the very beginning of the podcast, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, QR codes were considered dead, and then the pandemic hit, and the need to touch as few things as possible to slow the spread of the virus meant QR codes took off quicker than Netflix stock. But now, as consumers, we are programmed to scan them without a second thought, and we do find ourselves in vulnerable situations. And the FBI have even issued a formal warning about that. So there is positive steps in the right direction. But I think more than anything, your work here, sitting down, spending 35 minutes with me, sharing your insights, I think that will go such a long way. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with me.
I really appreciate you having me. This has been a lot of fun. Maybe we can do it again sometime on my next research.
What a cool guy. And as I said, before we even started recording, and he was showing me those microchips under his skin, my jaw simply dropped and my face was full of childlike curiosity and wonder. And if you enjoyed today's podcast as much as I did, please keep a lookout for Len on the speaking circuit too. I know he's got some talks lined up in Newcastle and London here in the UK, as well as the US. And hopefully one day I can join him for a whiskey and barbecue in Austin too. But we covered a lot here. And did it open your eyes around QR codes? Do you have any other examples, any other insights you'd like to share? Whatever it may be, email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. Let me know. You've heard from me. You've heard from Len. It's so important for me to get your voice on here too. Other than that, just a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.